Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the ADH Dads. I'm your host, CJ,
I'm JJ.
and today we're joined with a very special guest. Her name is Becca Lory Hector, and she was diagnosed as an adult with autism, which I'm fascinated to hear that story. And ever since she's been diagnosed, she's become a dedicated autism and neurodiversity advocate. She's a researcher, consultant, speaker, and author. And she even teaches a course called Self-Defined Living, A Path to a Quality Autistic Life. So she's basically an autism coach with autism. So I'm really glad to kind of talk to her. You know, we do this and do coaching, and we have our own challenges and our own neurodiversity here with our ADHD. But I would love to kind of hear this experience and this story and how she kind of focuses on autism and neurodiversity consulting with an emphasis on promoting an active lifestyle. So welcome, Becca. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So, I'm curious, when were you diagnosed with autism, and what made you seek that diagnosis out?
Well, it's a very sad story, actually, and when it comes around to it. But at the age of 33, so I'm 47 now, right below 47. But when I was 33, I had worked my 15th job in 13 years and really just basically gave a middle finger to the world and climbed into my bed, in my childhood bed in my childhood apartment, and waited to die. That was essentially what I was hoping would happen. I was homebound and suicidal for 3 years until at the age of 36, I randomly, and it is a story, I have had migraines my whole life. And so my migraines started to change. And you know how doctors freak you out about anything like that. Oh, it's brain cancer. It's changing, right? So I was homebound at the time and not really excited about going to a doctor about it and doing a bunch of my own research on WebMD, like we all do. And then I was frustrated. So I went to Wikipedia, a far better source. And that's where I kind of started researching what was going on with my headaches, and it somehow ended up reading about olfactory hallucinations and all kinds of really scary things. But at the bottom of one of these entries in Wikipedia, and we've all been in that vortex where you're just clicking the bottom link of whatever you're reading. And so on the bottom link of one thing that I was reading, there was something called sensory processing disorder. And I was like, what's that? Click, right? And I'm over in it. And I start reading it, and I was like, wow, that sounds really familiar to me. Like, that sounds super familiar. And at the time, the link underneath that was Asperger's syndrome. And we were still using Asperger's syndrome at the time. And so, click, right? And my entire life changed right in that moment. It was like reading my own biography on Wikipedia. And it was both the scariest and most exciting moment of my life in that moment. Again, I was homebound, so I emailed the link to my mom, and I just didn't want to bias her. So I waited her 3 days to check her email, and she checked her email and read the diagnosis and came into my room and said, you found it. And by that, she meant the thing we had talked about my entire life, the thing that had no name that we couldn't get the right name for. And I knew in that moment that things were going to change for me, that there was going to be some difference in the way that things were happening. And so after that, I really pursued a formal diagnosis. I was not well mentally, and I didn't trust myself at the time. And so I really needed outside reinforcement for my own thoughts until I was feeling a little bit better and kind of going into myself. And that's how it happened.
Wow, yeah, I saw on your website and in your coaching, autism changed my life, and I was curious to kind of ask you where you kind of came to that conclusion and what positives you've pulled out from that experience. But it sounds like quite literally,
Yeah.
autism saved your life.
Yeah, quite literally, right?
Yeah.
I am 100% positive that I am on borrowed time right now, right? If that diagnosis hadn't come into my life in that very surreptitious way at that particular moment, most definitely I would be dead. I had plans, right? I was someone who had already had plans. I'd been having suicidal ideations most of my life. This wasn't a new feeling for me. And so it was very much that serendipitous that it just, came into my life at that time. And I'm somebody who, when presented with that fork in the road of like, here's what you just learned about yourself, because there's this option as an adult, you get this diagnosis or it comes into your life, you get identified, whatever language you're choosing. And in that moment, as an adult, you can be like, you know what? Screw all of you. You know what? You didn't help me my whole life. Nobody did anything for me this entire time. It's been incredibly difficult. And now I'm going to be an ornery, angry person for the rest of my adult life. And I have, a flag to raise about why, right? And you can do that, right? But the other option is the other side of that fork is I can try and see if I do things differently with this new piece of information, will things work out better, right? Because insanity is doing the same thing the same way all the time, but you get your diagnosis and now you have a new way to do it, right? And so it's no longer insanity. And so if you go on that journey, because then if that journey fails, the option to just, toss up your flag is still there. And so it felt like the right choice to see if I could salvage what was left of my life, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because why I wanted to kind of probe you about that autism saved my life is, we've had quite a bit of mix of guests on our podcast here with different forms of neurodiversity, and some of them feel very empowered by it. This is my superpower. I feel so strong knowing this about myself, and this is how I feel that I excel. And some of them have said, like, no, it's not a superpower. And by kind of saying that, I feel like you're, devaluing my experience with it, and
Right.
maybe that validation isn't there. And I've kind of wondered what the line is that kind of differentiates the two experiences. But hearing you talk has kind of like brought it home for me, in the sense that like both of those perspectives are really grounded in the validation of this, right? Like the
100%.
diagnosis, the labeling of it, the term, instead of saying like, you're just crazy, you're just emotional, you're just erratic, or I can't deal with you, or I don't know how to deal with you. It's someone finally saying like, it's okay, I believe
And
you,
it's
it's
not even, it's
okay,
about,
and it's total, you're, nothing is wrong with you. It's,
yeah, I mean,
this
in
is
a
a
sense, it's
term and a way
that,
of thinking and acting.
but it's also this awareness, because even without the diagnosis, right, there's still an awareness that you have that you're different, right? I didn't have the word autism. I didn't have a clinician to tell me what it was called, but I knew that I was different from my peers. I knew that I was having experiences that were different even from my mother's experiences, right? She couldn't identify with my experiences. So for 36 years, I lived a life of invalidation, right? Where no matter what it was that I was experiencing, the world or the people around me were telling me, no, that's not true. So here I am, and someone who's really, really sensitive. My sensory system is really sensitive, right? So I've always been that way. I also have light eyes. So
In
the
what way?
sunlight,
I'm curious. Like,
yeah,
what, in physical touch or smell,
always.
sight,
I
hearing,
have
all of
a
it is just
hyper, yeah.
understimulated, overstimulated? How do you experience that?
I'm somebody who experiences a hypersensitive sensory system. So we kind of come in two groups. Some of us are hypersensitive, some of us are hypo. So some of us are sensory seekers because we don't feel it enough naturally. And some of us feel it too much all the time. And so we don't need any more than there is, right? We're kind of sensory avoiders. We don't want any more than we have. And I'm one of those sensory avoiders. And in the meantime, I spent the first 40 years of my life growing up in Queens, New York City. And that was the most unpleasant experience ever, right? Because how in that
I can
environment do
imagine. I
you
don't have sensory
voice,
issues, and
right?
it's
And
it's
you
it's
don't, right?
overstimulating for me.
And so think about having to survive that whole experience while the whole world is telling you, no, that's not what it's like. No, it's not crazy in Manhattan. No, it's not that. No, it's not too loud or too bright or too much or too this, right? No, no, go about your life, right? And that invalidation takes a toll on your self-esteem. It takes a toll on what you want to do with your life, whether you enjoy life or not, whether you are surviving life or thriving in life. And those are two very different experiences, right? So I think even though like I knew that I was different always. And so what happened for me with the diagnosis was this dual experience of like, haha, I told you, which was my real, like my gut response was, haha, right? I told you, I told you, I told you, I told you I was different. I told you this, I told you that, I told you I needed help. I told you, right? And then what I wanted to do was do that, like go on Fox News and be like, hi, world, I was right? And that is what I wanted, but that's not the right way to go about it, right? Because what was happening for me was I was right, but now what? So what that you're right? What are you going to do with this information and how am I going to utilize it, right? How does it impact me, right? And so for me, as a sensory sensitive person, that was one of the first areas that I needed to deal with. It was the area that I struggle with the most. It still is. Finding regulation in a sensory sensitive body is incredibly difficult, right? Finding those spaces of comfort where everything is just enough, right, is really difficult. And I never got to explore that. I never got to experiment with it. I never got to have a good experience and duplicate it. Never had that either, right? Because even my overly sensitive good experiences were misunderstood, right? What joy looks like for me was misunderstood, right? And so all of those things get mixed up, and it makes you kind of like wacky in your own brain about how you're experiencing the world and how you make decisions and how you make smart decisions for yourself. Because in effect, I was making uninformed decisions. I was making uninformed guesses for 36 years about life, right? I had no shot of success. Hell, right?
What does misunderstood joy look like?
For me, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody because
Yeah.
joy is different for everybody. But for me, it was being denied my interests, being denied my interests of choice. And so I was a young girl in the late 70s, early 80s, and it blew the minds of people everywhere that I like dinosaurs more than dolls. That I wanted to learn more about the way that volcanoes were formed than I cared about who was wearing what, sneakers, right? Not my life, still not my life, right? And so what would happen is I would get poo-pooed, or I would have to hide my joy. I would have to hide the thing I was interested in, right? Because even the things I found joy in were inappropriate, right? Um, and so it was really very complicated for me in that way. And I had a lot of personal work to do to uncover all of that. So like, because there was a lot of anger over it, and rightly so, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about then too. Is that invalidation for so long. Once you receive this diagnosis and you realize, hey, this is me, and I am validated through this. How do you then have that transformative process, like somebody who's suffering from self-esteem issues because the world's been denying them who they are for so long? How do you start to make that transformation?
It's hard and it's slow. I like to remind people that you didn't get to where you are in no amount of time. It didn't happen overnight, right? So for a lot of people, I end up seeing a lot of or late diagnosed autistic adults arrive to me with burnout. Most of us get to burnout if we don't get a diagnosis and we don't learn the skills and the ways that we can support ourselves through things and how to say no and all kinds of other skills, right? We put ourselves in a life that is not sustainable over time, and we get ourselves into burnout. And somebody in burnout didn't get there overnight. Somebody who's in true burnout, who can no longer do things to take care of themselves, and sometimes there's days where maybe they can't speak or they can't take a shower, right? Things like that. That person didn't get there overnight. If you looked back in their lives about 6 years before that, right, they probably look totally different. And so what I have to remind people is you didn't get there overnight. You're not going to get out of it overnight. It took you 6 years to get in. It's probably going to take you 12 years to get out, right?
So
That's
what's kind of
usually
some
what happens. Hmm?
what's good questions that you kind of bring about at the beginning of this process to get, your clients and yourself to think about what those things are, those unnecessary or those, traps that we've kind of programmed into ourselves after all this time that leads to this burnout.
It depends, right? Because everyone's under different circumstances. So it depends on how they arrive to me. Some people are having problems in their marriage, or maybe they're having issues being a parent, or perhaps it's a workplace problem that they're having. So it's dependent on the area of their life where they're feeling the most uncomfortable. That's where I start. I always say, like, we could do some crazy life exercise or whatever. But the truth is, if you ask somebody, where are you most uncomfortable in your life right now? They can usually tell you where that is, right? And if we look at the place where you're most uncomfortable and we can make it more comfortable, well, it's easy to do it to the other places, right? It gets easy to do that. And it's usually the place that it's bothering us the most, that we have the most difficulty. We're struggling with whatever it is. And when we start to unpackage that, fixing it in the other areas is easy because you're building a habit. You're building new habits from your old habits. And that's really important. But it's a process of like self-awareness. right? All of us as adults should go through some process of self-awareness. Please evolve as a human being after you're 18. I would really like that, right? We all need to be in that evolution phase. And so we should all be learning about what our triggers are, what our glimmers are, what our, right? But for autistic people in particular, in burnout, the place that is the one that is needs the most attention is usually joy. And I say that because, like myself, who experienced a lot of resistance to the way that I experience joy, right? People have cut it out of their lives entirely because it's seen as an extra by our society, right? Joy is extra. If you get joy, congratulations, it was a good day, right? But that's it. That's how we see it. We don't value it for what it truly is and how much energy it gives us, how much motivation it gives us, how it builds into our self-esteem, how it makes us want to wake up the next day, right? All of those things. And so what happens is most neurodivergent folks will be ignoring their joy because they have to be occupied with everyone else's comfort all the time.
Oh man, you're really, oh gosh, you're making me realize this trap that I've fallen into as a parent of a neurodiverse child. You know, so many of the times when my daughter comes home, she's 9 now, and comes home from school, there's a lot of days where there's this conveying of misunderstanding from her friends. You know, she's again very sensitive, sensory issues. She cannot wear jeans. She cannot wear socks. It has to be sweatpants. It has to be like open-toed shoes or sandals. You know, and she can't handle certain food textures like cheese or certain consistencies. So she's wiping her cheese and sauce off of her pizza, and her friends are starting to notice these things as she's moving into that preteen, you know, phase of like, what's up with your fashion sense, and you're wearing sandals and sweatpants, and we're trying to wear all the cute, you know, skirts and this and that, and why are you doing this with your pizza every day and making a mess and grossing the rest of us out? And you know, she can be empathy can be a difficult thing for her to realize at this age too, because she's so just what I'm noticing is an overwhelm of the routine and expectations of society and school and life to wear a certain type of shoes and have a dress code and do things a certain way. And I've really been failing in some degrees as far as like trying to teach her how she needs to behave to be more accepted by everybody else. You know, where I really should be concentrating on this self-celebration of the things that she does differently. You know, and sometimes those things can be controversial or misunderstood by a lot of her peers. And, you know, it's in good intention that I have as a father. I want her to succeed and be liked and to fit in and not feel ostracized, especially because of this thing or this diagnosis. So I try to show her all the lessons that I've learned and the things that I've picked up and how I see society works in the school system. And I'm realizing that it just may be a wall that I'm putting up between us of me being one of those people that don't understand her, you know? And
yeah, I mean, in essence, right? Because what we're saying when we teach those things, which lots of parents do it, right? Nobody wants to see their kids suffer, and that's period where it's coming from, right? So it's like, I will do whatever to make this life easier for my kid, right? And if that means I have to teach them these things, that's fine. But what I would love for our parents to be teaching our kids instead is, here's how you get your needs met, right? Like, not here's how you fit in better, but here's how you get your needs met. And here's why it's an issue for those kids at the table that you do this with your pizza. But that doesn't mean you have to eat pizza the way you don't like it, right? Because that is nonsense, right? What we're saying to her then is her needs are not as significant as the comfort and as fitting in, right? Those things are more important than getting her needs met. And is that the adult that we want our child to be? Someone who just gets rolled over, right?
Yeah. And I trick
No,
myself into thinking, by framing it, this is how you get your needs met. Sometimes I think, well, is that the wrong approach because I'm just raising this selfish person that just wants
absolutely
a
not.
quid
Because
pro
how do
quo
you,
type of relationship?
right? But what is the other thing we tell people? You cannot pour from an empty cup, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
if she is not taking care of herself, she can't be a good spouse or a good partner or a good mother, right? Because she doesn't know how to take care of herself. And then she can't teach her kid how to take care of itself, right? And so we're perpetuating this nonsense that is a societal setup for failure. We have an entire world built around sameness. That's what we did. We said, here's a world. We want everyone to look the same, everyone to dress the same, everyone to work the same hours, everyone to succeed at the same things. And we're all going to go out there and do that. And you know what the sad part is? Every single human being is different. Every single one of us is different from the other. And so we set ourselves up for failure real pretty. And that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at workplaces that are built on the concepts of industrialization. When here we are on this lovely, Zoom call that we're on, having this technology, right? We're in the middle of the technology age. Why are we holding ourselves to standards from industrialization, right? And that is when we see this remote work return to the office butting heads, right? Turn to the office is the old folks wanting to keep it the way that it used to be in industrialization, and remote work is technology being used at its best and utilized. It's evolution of the workplace, right? It's the same thing with our people. We all each deserve to have our needs met. And we deserve to be in relationships where everyone's getting their needs met. We deserve to be in workplaces where we're getting our needs met. And if we don't learn what those needs are, and then also how to ask for them, we're all like walking out there like unformed human beings, right? And so that's what our kids really need. What they need to know is the truth. People are mean. Sometimes they're going to make fun of you for being different. That doesn't mean that you're being different is wrong, right? Just means
Yeah.
that they're thinking about it. Good for them. You be thinking about your pizza and eating lunch, right? Because if you don't eat your lunch, you're not making it through class because you didn't have enough sugar and blah, 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 right? So needs, needs, needs. I need to eat lunch, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to say, I'm unique just like everyone else.
Correct. Exactly,
um
right? And the fallacy that it's otherwise is a lie that we're telling each other, right?
I think there's, of course, there's the comfort in having, a predictable environment or a predictable script. So that's kind of my question is, having all that in mind, the fact that we are all unique and we need to find a way to celebrate that in any environment that we find ourselves in, is back to the script is how does one approach somebody who is experiencing a heightened level of sensory overload in their environment? How do we approach that with a conversation, with a gentle question to accommodation?
I want you to imagine a boiling pot is what I want you to do. When you see someone who is an overload, whether it's sensory or otherwise, right? We use the term meltdown in autism land, so I'm sure everyone who's listening, right? And by the way, adults still have meltdowns. Some of us internalize our meltdowns, but we all melt down for the rest of our lives, okay? So it doesn't go away. It just looks different. And so, when that happens, that's a boiling pot. That means that what we've done is agitated the situation so much that everything's all dysregulated and it's all popping bubbles out of the pot. And so, your first instinct with a boiling pot would not be to run up to that boiling pot and grab it with two hands, right? And lift it off the stove. Why? You burn your hands, big mistake, pots falling on the floor, big mess. Same thing is going to happen with a person. The worst thing to do is to go over there and try to fix it, right? Because you can't. It's already a boiling pot. The only thing that you can do at that moment is lower the fire, lower the heat so that the boiling goes down. And that's your job as a support person, whether it's as a parent or as a spouse. My husband has to be that for me all the time, right? It's how do I remove the flame? How do I get the fire away so that this person can stop boiling and then maybe they can tell me what they need and then maybe we can fix it, right? But if the pot's boiling, nothing's happening. So the best thing that you can do is be that person, and your person, right? You know your kid, whoever your person is, right? And you know the things that trigger them. For me, it's loud, crowded spaces. If people are bumping into me and touching me, I'm gonna punch a person, right? I will lose control. I will have a meltdown, and it's not going to be pretty. And I don't look like a sophisticated 47-year-old woman when it happens. right? It's not nice, and it's not pleasant for me to experience either. It doesn't feel good to be the boiling pot either, right? And so what we want to do is someone to, like, my husband knows he can't really talk to me in those moments. I won't really hear him well. He knows he probably shouldn't touch me, right? So what he usually does is he'll grab a shirt, right? Or he'll tell, like, in some way signal me to grab his shirt, and he'll lead me out of the space that we're in, right? And then once I'm in a quieter space, the pot starts coming down. Now I can be like, did you see that guy who almost knocked me over? Yeah, blah, 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 right? And I can tell him everything that happened, and we can kind of get through it and then decide, do we want to go back in? Are we done for the day? What are we doing after this, right? And we can recover from that. But when somebody keeps putting more flame under your boiling pot, you're not doing anything the rest of that day, right? That's it. Day's over. And so that's kind of what I would say is when we want to help someone, our instinct should be not to do what we think is right, but to do what they would want us to do, right? We always try to help, and sometimes our help isn't help at all. And so what we want to do is know that person. And so set up those scenarios for yourselves when things are calm, right? My husband and I, when we're watching TV, we talk about, we're going to go do this tomorrow. What's our exit scenario, right? Like, how are we getting out? Is the dog home alone? Do we need to, what's it, right? So do that with your kids. Teach them how to do that so they know to do it for themselves when it's their scenario alone.
What would you say to 9-year-old Becca in some scenarios where you felt maybe misunderstood or ostracized because of the way that you were?
9-year-old Becca was not a happy person. And there's something about that 8-9-year-old range. And I don't know what it is developmentally because I'm not a developmental person, but there's some kind of self-awareness that changes or happens at that age. For me and for a lot of other autistics, that's about the time when we started to recognize that we were different. Like, we kind of knew it, our families knew it, but a lot of us are parallel players. So we'll play on our own next to our peers, right? A lot. And so we don't really start comparing ourselves to our peers until somewhere around that 8-9-year-old age. So you're recognizing it with your daughter because girls start first, right? We're more complicated socially. We're meaner socially, right? We use more evil tactics than boys.
These little girls are so vicious at 9, vicious. Becca. I'm telling you, they would make me cry.
Yeah, they would. It is
They are brutal.
It is brutal, 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 right? And it's crazy because you see all the women out here, right? Pro women, let's support each other, right? But when we're growing up, we eat each other like wolves. It's disgusting, right? And that's the truth. And that's what your daughter deserves to hear. Women are not nice. They are not always nice. They use not nice tactics, right? Sometimes they're invisible tactics where they're nice to you to your face and then they turn around and talk to each other about you back there, right? There's lots of things that little girls do, but little boys it comes later, right? Because for a while you guys are okay to just punch each other and then walk away from your fight, right? And that's kind of acceptable, right? It's socially acceptable for that to happen, but girls aren't allowed to just punch each other and walk away from their fight. So we get nasty, and it's these elongated arguments because they're extended, right? And so what would I say to me, little me? I would say, honestly, stick to yourself, kid, because the truth is that the world that I was growing up in wasn't welcome to people like me. The world that you guys are raising your kids in is slightly more so, right? Schools are at least talking about it. IEPs are happening, right? We're not putting people who are different in separate schools, in different buses anymore, right? But that's the world that I grew up in. And so, I would have said to me, what you feel, I would have validated myself in my feelings, I think, because no one else was doing that for me.
I have a practical real world example that we, experience pretty regularly is my kiddo will voice that he hates homework and that he does not want to do it and will have the meltdown, as we already talked about, at the idea of doing it, even though it's an everyday, or nearly everyday expectation to do 5-10 minutes of this or that. How do you help somebody get through the things that they don't want to do, but are kind of almost like, dare I say, a daily essential or requirement?
Okay, this is the key to my brain, and sometimes it works for others, right? And that's the thing about all of these neurodiversities. All of our brains are different, so it doesn't always work for everybody, just so that we're clear, right? But for me, I needed to understand that, first of all, I need to understand, all of us need to understand, we all have to do some things we don't like some of the time. For me, that includes showering. I hate it. It's an exhausting process to me. I also don't enjoy eating food. It interrupts my day a lot, and I really hate it, right? But these are human things that have to happen, and I have to do them, right? And they enable me to do the things that I do like. The problem is, and again, it comes back to joy again. If there's not enough that you're doing that you do like, the balance doesn't feel fair, right? So if all you're doing is homework, 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 and there's no joy, you wouldn't want to be doing it either. You'd say, why? There's no payoff, right? There's no end to it. And when does the good stuff happen? Right? Why am I here? And so what we need to do for kiddos like that who are really struggling with those things is remind them of the good things. Like, validate that homework sucks, because you know it sucks. I know it sucks. We all know it sucks. And we also know it's busy work. Everyone knows that too, right? And so, let's not pretend that it's not. We know that. Let's validate that experience, that it's not fun, right? But also remind that when we do those things, we get other things, and as a result, it's a logical formation, right? And for me, sometimes I'm motivated by what I'm not getting. And this is going to sound crazy, but I'd rather not be bothered by my teacher, right? And if I do my homework, chances are my teacher will leave me alone. But if I consistently don't do my homework, guess who I have to spend more time with than anybody else, right? That teacher. Well, if I logic it out, and neurodivergent brains love logic, right? It makes more sense for me to just do my homework, because ultimately, even though I don't like it, it's still easier than hanging out with my teacher, right? It's understanding the full process of it all, right? That each day's homework in and of itself is not important. You're right. It's not. It's the consistency of doing your homework. It's learning to have a routine, right? It's meeting deadlines. That's what we're really teaching, right? And so that's,
Yeah, I
we
think
need that. Neurodivergents need that context
yeah,
to
I
understand it.
think that all of this stuff is here. The motivation and the right context, or the like you said, the adversity to not want a certain outcome can be great motivation. And
Right.
I think all of these things are there for each individual with autism, not autistic people, but each
Correct.
individual. Because like we're saying, you meet one person with autism, you met one person with autism. But I think that what is really kind of like the glue in kind of finding the motivation is the creativity. Like I think like being curious and empathetic and knowing yourself or your child, or your spouse, and being creative with that motivation is like what we really can like pull out of our
Yeah, because that's where the
neurodiverse
joy comes
partners and
from,
friends, right?
right? Because
Exactly.
that's when the joy happens, is when we're being creative about our solutions, right? When we're having fun with how we get things done, right? All of us say all the time, you hear people say, I just want to work with people I like, right? Why can't work just be fun, right? Because we all, even as adults, still feel that way. Like, it's not fair. I don't want to sit in another meeting if I'm not going to get XYZ. Because meetings, we don't get anything done, and everybody knows it, right? And so it's like, again, that concept that without the balance, none of us wants to live a life without balance. It feels terrible. And it's about, sometimes too, it's a group journey, right? A lot of us are, as that parallel play works for us for a reason. It motivates we motivate off each other. So like when I have a lot of work to do, sometimes I'll sit next to my husband on the couch, and it's not because he's helping me with my work, but just having him there, right? It makes me have to be accountable. He knows I'm busy doing it, right? All of these other things happen. And if he's busy on something and I'm busy on something and we're next to each other, we both are motivated. So doing things like that, going on that journey with your kids, like what keeps you motivated, what makes it fun, because I bet you'll discover things about yourself too along that way, because no one ever gave us that advice. No one ever let us seek our joy, right? And so we've also, all of us have lived without it for a long time.
Do most of your clients have neurodiversity diagnosis, or do you have some that are neurotypical as well? And what
I
are
do
a
not.
majority of your clients?
Yeah, I don't work with neurotypicals very much. I used to. I used to have a lot of parents that wanted to come to me, but I felt like that dynamic wasn't really working for their kids. It was you
So
can't
it's
meet
mostly
somebody.
adults
Yeah,
ASD that you work with.
yes. And I don't really do one-on-one clients anymore. I just do my course. I do group teaching because that's much more effective. We get to meet each other, and we get to, folks get to meet someone who's about to go on the same journey as them. And sometimes that friendship or that connection stays with folks after that. And so I try to create some of that. And it's just very exhausting for me to do one-on-ones. And I honestly can't do enough of them with the amount of energy it takes to actually pay my bills. It doesn't work out financially to be able to do that. And
I
so group
still, though,
teaching is more
imagine like
effective.
someone like yourself with neurodiversity really can speak to another neurodiverse
Oh yeah,
person rather than, a lot of these therapist client dynamics,
yeah.
are a neurotypical person trying to tell a neurodiverse person what it's like to have their
Neurodiversity,
neurodiversity,
right? It's absurd.
and
You can't even say it out loud without
yes,
feeling
I
it's
know,
absurd, right? And
exactly.
that's exactly how we feel, right? That's how we feel when we go to therapy. Is exactly that. Who the hell are you? And if you think that your kids aren't thinking that, you're crazy. They're also sitting there going, "Oh, this idiot." They're probably smarter than half the people that take care of them, right? And so it's okay to have that experience because there's things to learn in there too. It's not that those people don't have something to teach you. But what we do find is there is a double empathy problem, right? It does exist, which means that there are different brain languages. The autistic brain socializes differently. The autistic brain functions about relationships differently. We experience joy differently. It's very different, right? Everything you do comes through your brain. So everything that I experience has to go through that filter of autism all the time, right? And what that means is my experience is much more in common and in line with other people who also have a similar brain to mine because we share a brain language, right? When I go out in the world and I hit people who are not neurodivergent and I have to communicate with them socially, I literally have to translate my social communication into neurotypical communication and then go out and do it. So whenever I'm in mixed company, I'm doing extra work because the onus is always on the autistic person to do the translating, right? When really what we have are, you'd never say to someone who spoke a foreign language with you that they're the person that, right? But we do that all the time, right? If someone comes to America, the onus is on them to learn English, right? And so it's that same setup. And so we have a lot of exhausted autistics out there who find it a lot easier to just hang out with their same kind because communication's easier. I don't have to do as much work. I don't have to, right? We like the same things for all the same reasons that you pick friends, that anybody picks friends, right? But that doesn't mean that communication can't happen. It just takes extra work, right? And what has to happen is a mindset set shift that there is one better way to communicate, right? Because what we're looking at are two different ways to communicate, not that one is better or less than, right? But right now, as the world is set up, so that the autistic version of communication is seen as less than.
Yeah, I was trying to find some statistics that I had written down on my phone here that I kind of want to bring up because what this is reminding me of is, over the last 10 years, the statistics on autism have changed in favor of a lot more kids being diagnosed. I think I'm going to butcher the statistics, perfectly, but I know, like 10 years ago, it was one in every 200 kids or something like that was diagnosed with autism, and now we're looking at more like 1 in 44 or something like that is what I think I read, and
Close.
it,
We're at 1 in
it
36 now.
1 in 36. Okay, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
terribly off, but
Not too off. That was the last.
but
We were at 1
the
in 46.
numbers, yes, the numbers have increased, right? And
Yeah.
I know that there's kind of some criticism of that. Of is there an overdiagnosis of neurodiversity?
Right.
And what comes back to me in our conversation here is just how powerful it's been for you, and in my experience too. Though I haven't been diagnosed with ASD, but my daughter has, and I've gone my whole life up until the last couple of years undiagnosed ADHD. So just even having that understanding of myself felt very powerful to me.
Doesn't, right? Because it changes your whole, anytime you make a decision now, right? There's that moment of pause.
Oh wait, I did that because of this.
Right? And this, these are the things that I'm always trapping myself with. Here it comes, that chore, right?
And where before it was like this thing that I noticed was there, I reacted a certain way, I had certain triggers or reactions to certain things, but it was always like, why do I do that? Why I can't seem to catch on to it like my peers, my family, that everyone is telling me I should, you know. And just having the validation of that was like, oh, that's why. And now instead of trying to run from it and be like, no, but I should be this, it should be easy, why isn't it? Something's wrong with me. Now it's, oh, there's just that there. You just have to take that extra step around, you know. You just can't go up the elevator. You just got to go around up the stairs, you know. We can still get there, you know, just having that understanding. So what I would like to say to those criticisms of an overdiagnosis is just like, again, imagine how powerful it is to give your kid validation. You know, and we're not saying to overdiagnose this and we'll shove some pills down their throat and they'll be better. It's you diagnose them so that you as the parent can understand your child better, that so you can get some sort of empathy around this.
Right? Yes. It's self-informing. It's all of those things. And what people miss when they see all these numbers is all the other stuff that impacts those numbers, right? What they don't remember is that for the first, I think it was 15 years that we were collecting these numbers, we only counted 8-year-old white boys. That's where our numbers came from. 8-year-old white boys. So no women, nobody of any other ethnicity could possibly have autism, right? And somehow if you were over the age of 8, it was gone. It disappeared, right? And that's what we were counting. And so those numbers still, their origin of those numbers is still in diagnostic bias, right? And so we're seeing these numbers change because we're working on what's broken. We're fixing the diagnostic bias. We're understanding that people can get diagnosed in adulthood. We're learning all the different ways that autism presents itself, right? We know so much more now than we knew when we first started counting, right? And the sad part is we haven't even gotten close to counting everybody. Diagnosis is so inaccessible in this moment that we have not even skimmed the surface, okay? Anybody who doesn't speak English as a first language, automatically, you're not getting a diagnosis, okay? Anybody who's over a certain age, automatically, your diagnosis is gonna be a difficult road, right? Anytime we're talking about someone who's having financial constraints, no diagnosis, right? Because only certain insurance companies cover it, only cover certain portions of it, right? And most people are still paying out of pocket. We're not talking about the wait times that are in excess of 18 months in some places. We're not talking about the uneducated people that are out there doing testing, right? We're not talking about any of those things, and all of those things impact that number. So I'm here to tell you that that number is going to keep changing, right? And my bet is that we're going to find out that it's a lot more of us that are neurodivergent as we're learning more. And it's not that we have an overdiagnosis problem or, some kind of pandemic of autism happening now, right? It's that we're learning, we know more. We're listening to the voices of autistic people for the first time who are sharing their experiences and being validated in that, right? We've shifted away from the medical model into the social model of disability, and that's impacted the way that we see people with autism, right? Lots of things are changing. And we're just going to keep getting closer. And so to all of you out there who think that, oh, you're inundated by autism now, hang on, get ready, because it's coming.
I mean, the truth of it is we're all experiencing the human condition, and there's a broad spectrum of what that looks like, whether it's social, cultural, hereditary. And I mean, like you said earlier, whether it's talking about the individual, or let's say we used to use Asperger's more as part of the conversation. That's kind of being phased out as much as it's along the spectrum of ASD. So we have human condition, we have ASD, and the truth is most people find themselves in the spectrum of the human condition, and therefore accommodation for what the individual experiences both on the social and emotional and biological levels has to be taken into consideration. And that's the challenge to various cultures of the world is how do we accommodate? And right now, like you said, we have too much of a specific sample of people that doesn't represent the population that we focused on for so long, that we need to continue to broaden our horizons as to what it looks like.
And we should want to, right? As a species, shouldn't we want to know more, right? Aren't we growing and changing? We don't want to know more about this, but not more about that, right? That's not a good attitude to have about things. And so, yeah, language changes, the way we talk about it, our understanding of it, all of those things. And so, stay curious, stay curious about all of it. I think we all, if you stop wanting to learn about yourself at a certain age, I mean, check out, because that's really where it all ends, right? So we should all be seeking to know these things about ourselves. And there's so much more that we don't know, so much. And we're only just learning. And so, because I want to say, because I know we're running out of time, I do just want to say, because I know you have a lot of parents in your audience. And so I want to say to the parents, I am not a parent. And so I cannot even pretend to empathize with what it was like for you guys. I am childless by choice, because I can't imagine what that would be like. And so, but what I want to do is tell you that you know your kids best. Other than themselves, you know your kid best. So default to them, but nobody else. There's going to be a lot of information out there. You will get a lot of advice from a lot of people. Sometimes it's well-meaning, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's informed advice, and sometimes it's not. If your gut tells you that some particular kind of therapy, a person, an activity just doesn't seem like a right match for your kiddo, and that's what your gut is telling you, trust yourself, right? Because the only percentage.
Well, since we're on this topic, and before we go, I really wanted to kind of get some clarification on this too. Is what is DEIB?
Ooh, okay.
And how does that go into your coursework?
It doesn't. My coursework is really about personal well-being and self-discovery and self-awareness. But the place that I struggled the most as an adult, and where I have the most trauma, is surrounding the workplace. It is incredibly difficult for autistic and neurodivergent folks out in the workplace right now. And that is not changing quickly enough. And so we are being bullied. We are being gaslit out in our workplaces. Many, many things are happening. We're being kept from advancement, kept from leadership positions, lots of things like that. And so the way that I figured out how to get there for my people is through DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Right. And that's the idea that in all of our shared spaces, especially our workplaces, we should all feel like we belong, right? And not like we don't belong. And as you know, we know it's part of the, our hierarchy of needs to make sure that we feel like we belong. And so it's a really important component of the human condition to feel that feeling. And most autistic and neurodivergent folks do not feel that way in their workplaces. In fact, most of us don't even feel psychologically safe in our workplaces. And so the work that I do when I'm not working directly with our folks, I'm out there working directly with companies and organizations to work on that piece for our people. To understand that there's more than just accommodations and accessibility to dealing with disabled folks, that we also deserve all the workplace wellness that anybody else deserves.
I love that, and love the message to the parents about stay curious, practice empathy, and utilize creativity, as we've been talking about here. So really enjoyed this conversation.
Have fun. Have fun being a parent. Please enjoy it. You
Exactly.
did it. Have fun.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think honestly, when we're having fun, that's when the most learning is occurring.
Right?
I mean, really, that's like when we're most engaged, when we retain the most. So
Right?
yeah, definitely, I am with that. Have fun. Yeah, but before we go, Becca, can you share some social media links if people want to get in contact with you or learn more about what you do and what your website is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm pretty easy. If you use my full name, Becca Lory Hector, Lory it is, you can pretty much find me anywhere on Google. You'll get both of my websites, my coaching website and my DEIB website. I am really active on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to follow me there and engage with me on my LinkedIn profile, I am on there more than I should be. And I'm happy to chat with folks and share resources. And of course, my DEIB website is trulyinclusiveleadership.com. And you can find me at Becca at Truly Inclusive Leadership if you want to shoot me an email.
Great, awesome. And don't worry, guys, I will put all of that in the show notes for you. We're cutting this one close today because I got to skip out and take all three of the kiddos to the dentist office. So that's going to be our next episode topic, is how to navigate the dentist office with more than one kid. But thank you, Becca. This has been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. You've kind of really kind of come full circle in some of the things that I've been learning from some past guests and how I'm kind of putting it all together. So this has been really, really great for me, and appreciate your time and appreciate your words and love what you're doing out there in the world. So please continue to spread that love, continue to spread that positivity and build others up, because we need more of that in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I appreciate you having me.
All right, guys, this has been another episode of the ADH Dads. Stay tuned next week, and please reach out to Becca and like our podcast, and keep this momentum going of putting love and positivity out in the world. So until next time, I'm your host CJ.
I'm JJ.
And thank you, Becca. We'll see you next time.